Attention, attention. His Eminence, the Imperious Leader, will be with us shortly.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jewel Miller, and I'm here to talk about AI, robots, and other nonsense. We hear a lot about AI and the potential for robots that are like humans these days on the internet, a fair amount. Of course, it's been part of science fiction for some time. But now we've got people claiming that it's going to be real and it's going to happen soon. For instance, Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, recently said on the internet, and this is taken from YouTube, he said, "We're trying to build one intelligence that is smarter and more capable than humans in every way. We're trying to use this to solve the biggest problems facing the world. I think we will enable hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars of new business because we will have such powerful artificial intelligence. And someday, I think we will sort of build the descendants of humanity and launch them off to colonize the universe. In 10 years, we will have systems that sound today to be impossible. I think it'll be smarter than humans in every way." So he's basically saying that at some point, artificial intelligence and possibly robots are going to replace us, that they will become our descendants, that they'll be able to go off into space. And even in 10 years, they will be smarter than we are or have better mental capacities than we do. Now, is there anything to this? Well, I don't like the term artificial intelligence for a number of reasons, but let's just hold on to it for a moment and consider that if we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, we have to know what we mean by intelligence. Now, when I was a high school student in the 70s, we had at my high school an IBM 1130 computer, and I programmed it using Fortran. And this computer was a million times smaller and less effective and less powerful, at least a million times, than the common computers we use at home all the time nowadays. So I programmed it anyway to be able to calculate the amortization of a loan. That is, if you take out a house loan for 30 years at a certain interest rate, and it's a compounded interest, it compounds every year. So there's simple interest and compounded interest. I won't get into all that, but it's more complex than simple interest. And you want to figure out how much you have to pay every month, how much your principal gets paid down, and how much interest you have to pay, and all that. That can take quite a while to figure out by hand. But writing this program, you could simply enter what your loan was, for how long it was, and what the interest rate was, and it would spit out all that information that you wanted. And this was on a very simple computer. Now, was that old IBM 1130 computer intelligent? Well, no, it was a tool. It was a tool like, if I have a hammer and a nail and I want to hammer something together, I'm not going to try to push the nail with my thumb through the wood. It wouldn't make sense. It would take forever. Even if I took a brick or something and used it to push. By hammering with a hammer, I speed the process up tremendously and maybe make possible a process that wouldn't have been so otherwise. And the hammer and the nail, the hammer is just a tool. The same thing with the IBM 1130. So later on, my first personal computer was a Commodore 64, and it had 64K of memory, that's 64,000 bits of memory, bytes of memory, and that, again, nowadays computers might have 64 billion bits of memory, and it's entirely different. Again, it's a million-fold difference, essentially, between the computers of now and that Commodore 64. But in that computer, we had a game my wife and I used to play, several games made by the Infocom company. These were text-based games. So it would begin by the computer telling you something like, an alien spaceship landed in your backyard. And that's it. And then you have to continue from there by adding text instructions. For instance, look at the spaceship, you might type in. And then the computer might answer, you see a silver spaceship rising to the height of about 1 floor, and there's a door in the middle of it and a silver handle on the door. So then you type in, go and grab the handle, or try to open the door at the handle. And then the computer might say, it shocks you and you fall to the ground. So then you might say, well, look around on the ground. And it might say, you see a pair of rubber gloves. And then so you put those on, and then you try again, and you can open the door. And then from there, it branches off. You have multiple options that you can take, and the computer will give you different answers depending on your options. Now, was that Commodore 64 computer and those Infocom games intelligent? Well, in some ways they felt like I was playing with a real person who was giving me directions and telling me what was happening. It's very similar to the game Dungeons and Dragons that many people play, involving a real live dungeon master who will do the same thing as the computer did for us. So, is that intelligence? No. No, again, it's a tool that's emulating intelligence. It's emulating something about humanity. And we have a tendency to anthropomorphize. We have a tendency to, when we're little kids, we consider our stuffed animals to be alive. And we think that they have thoughts and feelings. And we imbue our pets with all kinds of thoughts and feelings. At least our pets are alive, and they probably do have some thoughts and feelings, but we imbue them with much more than they likely have. And this goes on throughout life. So if you have something that feels in some way like another human being, you tend to give it more credence and at least imagine that it is more human than it really is. And I think that's what we're encountering with some of this OpenAI stuff, and like ChatGPT. I think ChatGPT is basically like one of those Infocom games I used to have. It's more advanced, but it's the same basic principle. You ask it certain questions, and somebody has spent thousands, if not millions of hours, some programmers, trying to make ChatGPT and other similar quote artificial intelligence programs be able to recognize common questions, be able to pick apart meaning out of common questions, just like the Infocom game did, and then be able to serve up answers. Only this time, it didn't just have a few answers that were created by the programmers. It can search the internet for certain keywords that it pulls out articles from, and particularly from Wikipedia, but obviously other sources on the internet as well. What essentially is a giant plagiarism machine. You'll go on Wikipedia and pull out chunks and put it together with some other information it got from somewhere else. And in the process, it's taking what took humans thousands of hours to write in the first place. So, if you look at a Wikipedia entry, a long one, you can, especially if it's on something complex, you can see that somebody took an awful lot of time writing that information, researching it and writing it, putting it down. And the ChatGPT just steals it, takes it, and mashes it together with some other stuff. And in the process, creates some falsehoods known as hallucinations among the AI aficionados. So in other words, if you ask ChatGPT to write you some essay about some subject, it'll gather all kinds of information together, but in the process, some of this information interferes with each other, and it creates false statements. And that's a really bad thing. Especially consider if we were going to use it for medical diagnoses. You wouldn't want the computer to come up with all kinds of fake diagnoses or hallucinations of diagnoses. That wouldn't make any sense at all. Now, I imagine with time and enough smart people working on it, they're going to get that under control. Maybe. But the point is, again, it's all just a tool. It's all just a computer helping you do what you might normally do. You could write that essay on your own, and you're certainly going to have to go over it and weed out the hallucinations and probably change it to fit the way you like to speak. But it could help you if you want to write something relatively quickly. As a doctor, I can think of many ways I would like to have computers help me more and to a better degree. For instance, when I dictate my reports nowadays, there's always 1 or 2% error, but that means in 100 words you got 1 or 2 wrong words, and that's a lot of correcting to have to do. I wish that were better, and I think with time it should get better. I'd like to be able to ask my computer without having to look it up on my cell phone and take time. Just, hey, can you tell me the interactions of all these medicines that my patient's on? And it can give that to me, and that will be helpful in the work that I do. But I'm not going to assume that any of that involves actual intelligence. When we think about intelligence, we think about a sense of self, of consciousness, of a person. And computers aren't going to achieve that. And the reason is the human brain is not a computer. It's very, very more complex, much, much different. Computers operate on ones and zeros. They're binary. They involve, if you have an AI chip that has 1 trillion transistors on it, let's say, sounds like a lot. But each transistor can only handle a 1 or a 0. That's it. The human brain is basically a super powerful analog computer. It's true that a neuron, when it fires, sends an impulse down a synapse that could be, or down an axon to a synapse, that could be considered like a 1 on a computer. But the brain doesn't operate that way. When it sends the impulses, it's the frequency of firing of those neurons, the frequency of firing of that axon, and that matters the most over a certain range. It's a continuous range of frequency. And the faster firing that occurs, the more likely you're going to depolarize the next cell. In other words, the more likely you're going to get a signal across. And really the most basic computational unit in the brain are the synapses. And there's hundreds of trillions of those. And they're modified constantly by epigenetics, which is, in other words, certain genes are turned on or off depending on environmental needs. And they're modified in terms of the chemical milieu. There are neuromodulator chemicals in the brain. There are some neurotransmitters that spread out over an area. The medicines that I use, antidepressants for my patients, cause a reuptake inhibition so that the chemical that's responsible of communicating the signal from one cell to another, it hangs around longer and keeps communicating that signal. Versus if the medicine's not there, it would last a shorter amount of time. Every synapse is capable of drastic change according to numerous factors that go on in the brain. And every neurotransmitter can both inhibit or excite the brain depending on the kind of receptor it's connected to. And there's numerous, like for serotonin, you hear about that. You've probably heard about that in relationship to depression and certain antidepressants like Prozac. Well, there's numerous serotonin receptors in the brain. There's not just one. And they function differently for different reasons. The brain is beyond our comprehension right now. And ultimately, another big difference between brains and computers are the circuits in computers are run by a clock cycle. It has to be, because everything has to be harmonized perfectly according to this clock, so the bits go one way and then they go another and they don't clash. If they clash, if a program parts interfere with each other, you get the Windows blue screen of death in the old Windows computers. Or in other words, the computer locks up and you have to restart the whole thing to get it working. The brain, on the other hand, capitalizes on circuits clashing with each other. And that's the basis behind creativity, which is a huge part of what makes us human. And creativity is not just confined to the artists and musicians and top scientists. All of us employ creativity in our day-to-day lives. It's a crucial, fundamental part of who we are. So there's a lot of other ways the brain is different than the computer that I can go on about. And I won't continue on this particular talk about it, except to emphasize that the people that are talking about robots in the future, they're going to surpass humanity and all that, don't understand humanity. They don't understand how the brain works. They don't, and even the best brain scientists are still learning and learning and learning about how the brain works, and then how the mind is derived from the brain and how consciousness arises. These are all very important questions, and none of them are reflected in the current work in neural networks or AI or anything involving digital components. It is possible that we will be able to modify our organic components and in that way improve on our brains, etc. And but then we're just going to be changing us as human beings. So I'm not saying that never, ever, ever in the future, that would be foolish of me to say, that there would never be humanoid robots that would be just as good as us or in some ways better. I am saying, however, that everything you're hearing about now is hype. It's meant to generate, cash money for the companies. And, there's no reason either to imagine that you're going to have a robot companion tomorrow that's just going to be just like, if you couldn't find someone to be your companion through life, that would just be just like them. Nor is there any reason to fear that we're going to soon have robot overlords controlling everything we do. That's not going to happen. We might have people using computer technology to control everything we do, and to some degree that's happening now. But it's not going to be a robot overlord, not anytime in the foreseeable future. So you can just relax about that, and hopefully some good things will come out of this computer research, which will actually assist us in the work that we do to make us better at what we do. Just like technology has helped us in many ways to save time and become more efficient in other areas as well. So that's my thoughts for this week. Have a good week.